Did the United States intentionally hide and suppress information about the upcoming 9/11 attacks? Information that would have saved thousands of lives. Were the towers and buildings, like Building 7, brought down by a controlled demolition? Did the government assist Osama bin Laden after 9/11, taking him out of Afghanistan and hiding him in Iran to protect Osama bin Laden? Did that happen? Former Congressman Curt Weldon wants answers. Weldon spent 20 years in Congress. He was vice chair on the Armed Services Committee. He was pushed out of Congress by the deep state. He knows the deep state better than anyone. He blew the whistle on Operation Able Danger, which we'll get into. And now he's on a mission to get President Trump to pay attention and reinvestigate the 9/11 attacks and more about the deep state. So joining us now is former Congressman Curt Weldon, author of the book Awakening the Sleeping Giant. Here it is on your screen, and the former congressman joins us now. Congressman, great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, and thanks for your great work for the country. You do great. You're doing great work in telling the real story behind the scene of what's occurring in America and allowing the people to understand they can't rely on mainstream media to get the facts, and they can't rely on Congress. And I served there 20 years and get along very well with Democrats. The CIA and the intelligence agency distorts the information that Congress is presented with to make key decisions. I saw it, I document it, and I can prove it.
So a couple of things I mentioned there at the beginning about Osama bin Laden, about the 9/11 attacks and the deep state. Maybe we can walk back here and paint a picture for our audience of what you uncovered when you were in Congress and when you blew the whistle. Maybe we can start there if that's a good place to start. What did you uncover about Able Danger? Maybe you can explain to our audience what that is. And when you saw the corruption and the lies that the United States government was putting out to the American people.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm a firefighter. Before I got involved in politics, I was a volunteer firefighter, fire chief. When I went to Congress, I organized all the firefighters in America by organizing the Congressional Fire Services Caucus, which is what the book's about and the movie will be out this year called Firefight, about that process. My co-chairs were all the top leaders in Congress. Gore, McCain, Biden, Hoyer, all the top leaders all joined with me because of my leadership with the fire service. In that regard, I was at the Trade Center in '93 as the guest of Howard Safer, fire commissioner. I walked all through the garages, not as a politician, as a firefighter looking at what happened and how we could prevent another attack. I was with DEA and FBI, and I was assigned to work with a young New York fire officer named Ray Downey, who had become one of my best friends. I worked with Ray. I wrote the legislation after that trip that created the Gilmore Commission, chaired by former Virginia Governor Jim Gilmore. The Gilmore Commission made not 5 reports before 9/11 of what to do to prevent another terrorist attack. Largely, the government ignored them. And Jim Gilmore's a great guy. So while that was going on and while I'm pushing with Ray Downey to prepare for another attack, I'm the vice chairman of the Defense Committee, but I'm the overseer of all military intelligence. So I was the subcommittee chairman for $180 billion of research money for the Pentagon. They were standing up what were called information dominance centers, each of the services, to protect against cyber attacks in the 90s. I was going down to Fort Belvoir, where these Army's Information Dominance Center was headquartered. And they were doing amazing work with new software that wasn't being used by anyone else. I was looking at what their work, I was funding them, they were briefing me, I was getting information about what they were doing to prevent another terrorist attack. I did not bother getting right into the program. I could have, because I had top clearances, but I didn't need to know that. But I love the process, and in 1999, I convinced them to write a proposal that I went to the Deputy Secretary of Defense, John Henry, and said, we need this capability if we're going to prevent another attack. And John said, you're right, Congressman. Now, he was Clinton's Deputy Secretary of Defense. He said, but you've got to convince the FBI and the CIA to allow us to use their raw data because there are 33 classified systems funded by the federal government. On November the 4th of 1999 in my office, I had the Deputy Secretary of Defense, John Henry, the Deputy Director of the FBI, the Deputy Director of the CIA, and I handed them a proposal to create a fusion center of all 33 systems. Henry said, I'll manage it. I said, I'll fund it. The FBI said, we love it. And the CIA said, we're not doing it. We don't want it. 2 years before 9/11, the CIA stopped the sharing of intelligence that was critical to understand what was happening around the world. Then,
Why? Why did they do that? Why did they do that?
That's the $64,000 question. Did they did they have plans that they did not want other agencies to know about? Or was it simply a dominance thing where they think they know it all? I don't know that answer. That's a part of why a commission needs to be put in place by the president. But I can tell you this. I went around and gave speeches all over the country to intel groups where I talked about the need for a fusion center. I briefed Bush when he came into office. They did nothing about it, and I'm a Republican. 9/11 happened. I'm in my office, and I get frantic calls from 3 of the staffers on this unit down at the Army's Fort Belvoir. And they said, we have to see you. These are all separate calls. I said, we're under attack right now. Mr. Chairman, we have to see you right away. One by one, I met with them. Tony Schaefer, Lieutenant Colonel, Bronze Star recipient. Scott Philpott, Annapolis grad, Navy commander. Dr. Eileen Pricer, career intelligence. I met with them all separately, and they all told me the same story. They had been part of an Able Danger team established by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Hugh Shelton. That team was top secret. It was working out of Fort Belvoir. I was funding them, giving them whatever they needed. They loved me. They would do whatever I wanted. That's the group I used to present to Hamre that we should establish this fusion center capability for. And they told me the story, and they rolled out the charts that I'll show you. They identified Muhammad Atta, every Al-Qaeda cell in the world by name and by face 1 year before 9/11. I have the charts. All the names and the faces. They identified the 5 key cells. One was in Nairobi, Kenya. One was in all the places we had attacks. And one was in New York City with Muhammad Atta. 1 year before 9/11, the Able Danger team identified Muhammad Atta and several of the other terrorists in New York. They tried to transfer that information to the Justice Department 3 times. We had the names of the people that they contacted in Justice, and they were blocked. Why were they blocked? That's a good question. I will tell you right now, the 9/11 Commission is a cover-up. 100% guarantee you. Zelikow was the commission director. He led the cover-up, and he was appointed by the Republicans, even though he endorsed Kamala Harris in October publicly. The Democrats put Jamie Grelick on the commission. She was the attorney that Clinton appointed in the 90s that wrote the firewall memo that said you could not transfer military intelligence to civilian law enforcement. The 2 of them controlled the content of the commission. When Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, the Bronze Star recipient, member of the Able Danger team, came and told me they'd identified the information about pre-9/11 intelligence. Scott Philpott told me the same thing. Eileen Pricer, the same thing. Eric Kleinsmith, the same thing. Our military unit, Able Danger, did the job. And I wrote the manuscript. My lawyers said, if you publish it in 2006, when I ended my career, they said to me, they'll kill you. What they had done to my family to get me out, I said, I'm not going to risk that. They ruined my daughter's life, and what they did led to my son's death. Now, I'm a patriot, but I'm not stupid. So I waited, and now I'm talking. And they're not going to shut me up unless they kill me. And if they kill me, the story's already out now, and I'm going to tell more of it on shows like yours, because you want the truth, and you want to hear what the mainstream media will not touch.
So, Able Danger, we had all of it. We had all of the details.
All the details.
After you learned, on that day when you learned about it, did you know about Able Danger before that? Those phone calls with Tony Schaefer and others.
As the chairman of the Oversight Committee for all military research funding, I was funding their programs. That meant I had oversight, and they would come to me for funding, and I would support them. I was intrigued by what they were doing because I had been at the Trade Center in '93, where the firefighters told me we need this capability. Ray Downey was the chief of all rescue at 9/11. He was vaporized. I brought his widow and 5 kids down to my district 1 month after 9/11 to honor Ray as an American hero. Ray Downey should not have died. 343 firefighters should not have. That's why I wear this jacket when I go on TV. This jacket was given to me by Ray Downey. Fire Department of New York with my name on it. I don't wear it because I'm trying to make some show. Ray Downey gave me this. And I'm not going to stop this battle until I live up to what Ray Downey did for this country. And people like Ray that did their job. People like Battalion Chief Oreo Nelson, who went to the 78th floor of the tower, went up 40 floors in an elevator, climbed up 38 more floors, got off on the floor of impact, and you can hear his voice. I'll give you the tape. You can hear his voice over New York Fire Department communication. And he says, well, my unit has reached the 78th floor. There's 2 fires here, and we can control them. 1 minute later, the whole tower collapses. Now, I'm a firefighter. I was a fire chief. That's not reality. That's not reality. And it's about time we paid attention to the men and women who lost their lives in this situation. There are people behind the scenes who know what occurred here, both on the intelligence side, on the building side, on all the run up to this. And we owe it to the American people. We owe it to those firefighters and those families. And I work very closely with the 9/11 families. We owe it to them. And Donald Trump made the point, and now he's got to follow through. We need a presidential commission, not some bullshit commission of bureaucrats, not some commission of staffers, a presidential commission of experts, fire experts, building experts. Let them examine the intelligence, and I'll sit with them and give them everything I have. And
so let's talk about the buildings, the piece of, because I think we all agree, you and I both agree. I've read the 9/11 Commission report. It's a total cover-up. It's like reading a book of fiction. So a couple of things to unpack there, specifically the buildings. And when I talked about in the intro, do you believe that, based on the evidence, that these buildings were brought down intentionally, not by aircraft, but by controlled demolition, including Building 7?
Well, I was at the Trade Center the day I got a call from the New York firefighters and the fire commissioner when 9/11 happened to get up there because they needed help. And I had been there at 93. So I went up on the first Amtrak train. And when they picked me up at the station in New York and drove me down, we couldn't get down to Ground Zero. We had to walk. And I went down to Ground Zero, and I stayed with the fire department at Ground Zero. So I was there on the scene, not as a politician, as a firefighter with the New York Fire Department, as I was in 93. And there's no way that those towers that I had been to as a citizen, that what was left there was the remnants of those towers. There's just no way. I mean, I was there. The Building 7, there's no way that building came down without being hit by a plane. How that happened? I mean, I saw the reports. I have heard the statements. I've heard the language of the firefighters who were in the buildings hearing explosions. You don't hear explosions in buildings when there's a fire going on. Controlled demolition.
My old station, Fox News, of course, these videos have now been suppressed, but thanks to X, they've been resurfaced over the past few years. But you had one of my colleagues was standing there as a Fox News reporter speaking with the firefighters and talking about the explosions that were happening on the ground.
But many of
these
the
are not fantasies.
I'm very close to the firefighters. In fact, I went up last July and spent 2 hours with Chief John Esposito in New York. He's a good friend of mine, great guy. And I gave him the unpublished manuscript for Able Danger, and I signed it in honor of Ray Downing. I said, John, you're getting the first draft manuscript. I haven't printed it yet, but I want this for the New York Fire Department so that you have the historical record of what happened that could have prevented the loss of those 343 firefighters and all those others who died as a result of 9/11. And I did that because of my respect. And you lost reporters, all those innocent people who died there, and we just kind of cavalierly let it go by. That's outrageous. And let me give you one more point that you need to understand about the intelligence. When Tony Shaffer met after 9/11, Tony Shaffer, who had been a part of Able Danger, went back to his unit deployed in Afghanistan as spies. That was his job in the Army. So Zelikow and the 9/11 Commission staff went through Kabul to ask if anyone had heard anything about 9/11 so the 9/11 Commission could look at it. So Tony got word that he should meet with them. So in Kabul, Tony Shaffer met Zelikow. They traded business cards. And Zelikow said to him, we need to meet when you get back in the States. When Tony came back to the U.S., his office was locked. All of his records were sealed. They took away his security clearance. They tried to destroy his career. I defended him. I did a 1-hour special order on the House floor that you can Google, it's public, where I said this is worse than Watergate. What they're doing to Tony Shaffer for telling the truth. Tony then goes into the reserves, not in the active duty. He decides to write his book called Dark Heart. his memoirs as a spy. So as is customary and protocol, he asked his commanding officer to review the book. So the commanding officer reviews the book. He gives it okay. Tony's publisher publishes the book Dark Heart. And then the deep state finds out. They issue a cease and desist order. Stop printing the book. It's too late. So our government, using taxpayer money, bought all 10,000 first edition copies and destroyed them. Then, under oath, then they gave Tony the right to publish a redacted version. So I had Tony on a little podcast I do last October at 9/11, the anniversary. I said, Tony, you have the redacted version and the original version. What was the difference? What was so sensitive that our government wanted you to redact the book? What were they trying to prevent you from telling? Was it some state secret? He said, no, Congressman. They didn't want Zelikow name mentioned in my book. Now, Zelikow's name as the staff director of the 9/11 Commission is not a state secret. And for any government agency to want to redact Zelikow's name is a blatant cover-up. That's what they did. Now,
so
it gets
the
worse.
Cover-up. Okay, I'll let you
One
go.
more book.
I have a lot of questions, but
you got to buy this book. You got to buy this book. New York Times bestseller.
I've read it.
Called Horse Soldiers. I don't know the person it's about, but I'm going to tell you about it. New York Times bestseller. They made a movie about it.
Yeah.
The book's about our general in charge of special forces that ride horses. And that was a job. We have like 9,000 soldiers that are special forces that ride horses in remote areas. So his name is Keith Lambert. So he was deployed overseas when 9/11 happened. So the writer on page 27 of the book said, General, what were your thoughts when 9/11 happened? And General Lambert says this. Within seconds, I knew who had done the attack. And I knew it involved a man named Atta because I had been briefed on a top secret Army intelligence program. That's it. It's in the book. It's not in the 9/11 Commission report.
A top secret Army program.
Yes, that's Able
Danger. Able Danger.
Yep.
So they knew this. Where do you come down on? Because we've interviewed a number of whistleblowers and individuals tied to this who believe that those aircraft were not controlled by these amateur pilots at all. They couldn't have done the maneuvers that they did. And I guess this is, of course, why we need an investigation, but that they were remotely controlled. Does that comport with anything that when the CIA wouldn't be involved in your fusion project, the CIA didn't want to be involved?
Well,
do you believe the CIA was covering up an operation in order to thrust us into these forever wars and the Patriot Act and everything else?
One of the pilots in one of the planes that was taken over was from my district, Michael Horrocks. He went to Westchester, the same university I went to. When he was killed in the attack, I met his widow and his kids, and I actually funded a playground. I raised the money at their elementary school because Michael died in the World Trade Center. It was a personal thing for me. But I'm going to tell you what happened, and this happened with America. We were so consumed by the spin put out by the deep state, and they control the spin. You know that. I know that.
Right.
They make the spin. The spin was about getting Al-Qaeda, focusing on the war, sending the troops over, getting bin Laden. We forgot about, what about the investigation of what really happened here? Only when I was forced by my firefighter friends to look at the film, one is called Bravo 7, where you see Building 7 come down on its own. There's no fire there. It just collapsed. Now, Donald Trump has stated that publicly as a building person. He knew that. What I'm saying to you is, I'm not going to play into their hands where they can label me some kind of wacko conspiracy theorist. That's what they want. And they're the conspiracy theorists. They devise the theory, the conspiracy.
Right.
We need to convene a top secret panel of experts by the president to bring out the investigation. He's neutralized the people that were involved in overseeing at this time. Those 51 people were all in power during this time.
The 51
Now,
people who then put their names on the Hunter
right.
Biden laptop story as being
Absolutely.
a Russian. Yes.
The same
those
people
51.
that took me out of office. The same people.
Right.
Now we have an opportunity. We're not going to have it again. Now, two of my friends that work for the CIA died mysteriously. One of them was threatened by a man who was one of the 3 people under consideration to head the CIA under Obama. My friend from Florida who worked for the CIA his whole career was called by this man, and I have all the details, and he said to him, "Why are you helping Curt Weldon?" And my friend from the CIA said, "Because Curt Weldon's a hero." And the man slammed the phone down. I'm telling you right now, now's the time for America to stand together as Donald, and I don't know Donald Trump, I never met the man, but I know what he's doing. And he's the only one that has the guts, determination, the willpower, and doesn't need the money. And look, I grew up with Joe Biden. We grew up in neighboring towns. He drove 3 hours to come to my son's funeral as vice president and stood in line for an hour. I worked with Joe all during my time in Congress. My son that died was actually Biden's classmate at Archmere Academy. But there's an inherent problem. And my fear right now, this whole thing that just occurred with Ukraine, Zelensky didn't go in there and act that way on his own.
No.
That didn't happen on his own. He was totally briefed in advance of that meeting. Anyone who didn't see that doesn't understand what's going on in the world.
Victoria Nuland, Susan Rice?
Absolutely. It's more than that. It's an absolute. There's a cabal of people there that think they have better logic, better intelligence, and they can do what they want and get away with it. Well, now the Trump's in power. It's the last thing I do. I'm telling the story. And believe me, there are stories that I know about not just the 9/11, the whole Russia thing. No one led more delegations to Russia than I did. I was a co-chairman of Duma Congress with Steny Hoyer, and I was co-chair of the Rada Congress in Ukraine with Marcy Kaptur. We all of us got along back in the 90s. The Duma, the Rada, the Congress, we met. This war was contrived by the U.S. Not by the U.S. people, by the U.S.
In Ukraine,
and
of course.
Now millions of people are suffering. It's the same thing with Gaddafi. I led the first delegation to meet Gaddafi. I took Biden on my second trip to Libya to meet Gaddafi. I spoke to the entire country there. When the war started, Gaddafi had his son, who was in the U.S., reach out to 2 people, one of Bush's former staffers and one of Biden's former staffers, Brian Ettinger and Steve Payne, and they contacted me. And they said, "Gaddafi wants you to come to Libya." I said, "I'm not in Congress anymore." "He trusts you," because I never asked Gaddafi for anything. So I told my staffer that used to work for me, I said, "I'm going to go to Libya. I don't want any money for it. I'm going to see what he wants." I took Biden's staffer with me. I took Bush's staffer with me. And I took a film crew from ABC New York, Larry Menti. Larry Menti's ABC One, because I know the CIA would try to set me up. We flew into Tunis. We went down through Tbilisi by car into the capital during the war, Tripoli. The hotel we stayed in had been bombed out. I hand carried the letter back from Gaddafi offering to step down. The letter was addressed to Hillary Clinton and Obama. He offered to step down. We didn't want him to step down. We wanted him dead.
Right.
That's the U.S. That's what happens behind the scenes. This maniac activity has got to stop.
So when you uncovered Able Danger and you found out, you got those phone calls on 9/11, you wanted to come forward with this information. Who threatened you? Who threatened your life? And you had the charts to show. They had mapped this all out. They knew exactly who was involved. Who threatened your life? Was it the CIA?
In 2000, many members asked me to run for chairman of the committee. But back then, because I was very aggressive, but we had a seniority system where you move your way up, and I was like 5th in line to be chairman. So I went to Tom DeLay, and I said, "Do you want me to try to jump over them?" He said, "Well, we're not sure about that." I got letters endorsing me from 180 generals and admirals. I have them all. One of those letters was from Don Rumsfeld. So Don Rumsfeld in 2000 endorsed me to run for chairman of the Armed Services Committee. But when I came out against 9/11, when I came out with the story, and I said to the Pentagon and Don Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, "I want the Able Danger team to testify before Congress," he said, "No way." So I'm a very aggressive person, as you can tell. I got a letter signed by 250 members of Congress. 250 members of Congress. I can show you the letter. Democrats, Republicans all supported me, demanding that we let the Able Danger team testify. Rumsfeld refused. Would not let, even though he had supported me for chairman of the committee 2 years earlier, did not want the Able Danger team to testify in an open hearing. I testified.
Why? Why? Because it was all
because,
planned?
Well, yeah, there's information there. I don't know what the big picture is. I know what I know, and I know the cover-up that I saw, and I know what I can verify. I have the largest archives in House history. I have 100 hours of digitized interviews with agency people, with Democrat and Republican members, and I'm about ready to release all of that in the right forum. This country's been held hostage by people who think they know more than our people do. You know, 200 years ago, our patriots fought in the streets. Today, the fight's not in the streets. It's the fight in our minds to stand up against this oppression, where many of these deep state people are making tons of money. It's about money. It's about power. Right. And that's got to stop. And I can tell those stories, and I will tell those stories.
I want to talk about Osama bin Laden. It's a piece we haven't talked about yet, but I mentioned it at the top. The cover-up, moving him to a safe haven. Can you walk through, I think for most Americans, we've heard the story about Bill Clinton had the opportunity to take out Osama bin Laden years ahead of time and didn't. But to hear that we, after 9/11, instead of going after to kill him, shielded him, put him in a safe haven in Iran, set him up with cushy living, that must be shocking to many Americans, and I'm sure the 9/11 families as well.
It's disgusting. It's outrageous. And in my opinion, the people that did it are traitors and deserve to be held for traitorous acts. I got to the point as the vice chairman of the Defense Committee where I took my job seriously, but I could not count on the intelligence provided by the agency. It was spun politically for an agenda that they had, supporting either the Clinton administration or the Bush administration. So what I did around the end of the 90s, started with the investigation of China when I was on the Cox Commission. There's a group in Washington called the Cockroaches. It's a loose-knit group of people in intelligence who meet for drinks and go to dinner once a month. And my staff was involved with them, primarily all ex-military people. And I spoke to them a couple of times. I trusted them, they trusted me. So I formed a team of about 20, 25 employees of the agencies, DIA, NSA, CIA, FBI. I met with them in the Capitol members' dining room for breakfast, maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks. And they would feed me raw data that I could then go and use in my job as vice chairman of the Defense Committee. So after 9/11, you know, and by the way, I was concerned when George Bush decided to go into Afghanistan. I was concerned about our troops. So you know what I did? Without the support of our government, I arranged with two other members and one of my intel friends, Al Santoli, who was a Vietnam vet. We went over to Rome to meet in a private home of the king of Afghanistan, Zahir Shah, to convince him to go back to Afghanistan and convene a Loya Jirga of all the tribal leaders so they would accept Americans. I didn't want our American troops hurt, like the Russians have been hurt by the tribal groups in Afghanistan. I have photographs of these meetings with Zahir Shah. Zahir Shah went back to Kabul and did exactly what I asked. I did that. Not for the CIA, I did it for our troops. So then, I'm getting raw data that bin Laden's been sighted in a town called Ladiz. I have no idea what Ladiz is. So I walk up the street one afternoon after his votes to a bookstore on Pennsylvania Avenue. I bought a map and I came back to my office and I found Ladiz. It's about 10 kilometers inside the border of Pakistan in an area of Iran called Baluchistan. I said, what the hell? He's in Iran? So I go to one of my classified briefings for the committee, 60 members of the committee. I'm the acting chairman. And I ask the question. I have information that bin Laden's been sighted in Ladiz. What's your response? This is the response. Mr. Chairman, we've heard similar reports. We can either confirm or deny them. 3 months later, my intel guys came to me and said, we have information that bin Laden's being treated at a military hospital outside of Tehran. I go back to the briefing And I asked the same question of the briefers, Intel. And the response was the same. Mr. Chairman, we've heard similar reports. We can either confirm or deny. That's two. But then I get...
And this is right around, this is like December, January after 9/11?
Yeah, it's within 6 months after 9/11. Then I get the most distinguished Democrat member of the House on defense issues, Jack Murtha from Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Who sends Ron Klink. Now, Ron Klink is still alive. And Ron will not dispute what I'm saying. He's still alive. Ron Klink was a reporter for KDKA in Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
So Ron went to Murtha and said, I've got information about Iran. What do you think I should do, Jack? And Jack said, go see Curt. So Democrat Ron Klink came to my office and brought with him a knock. Do you know what a knock is?
No.
It's an employee of the CIA that gets paid, but they'll never admit they work for them. And they have them all over the place. So this guy was a knock for the agency. He was from the Midwest. So Ron has me meet this guy after he told me that the guy had information that Congressman you should know about because it involves Iran. I said, okay, I'll listen because I did all the security work. I've been in 104 countries, all the problem goods. I'll listen. The guy comes into my office. He doesn't know me. He says, Congressman Weldon, Mr. Chairman, he said, I want you to help me get back into Iran. I said, why do you want to go to Iran? I said, well, I work there for the agency. He said, and I have good friends there. He said, that's where bin Laden is. I said, well, why would you say that? He said, my friends have told me that. I said, well, why do you want to go there? He said, well, I'll leave my credentials. He said, there's a $25 million reward for the arrest and capture of bin Laden. And, I'll bring you back, dead or alive. That was right after 9/11. That's Ron Klink, Democrat. Then, separately from all this, I get a request from the Interior Department. They want to bring their top bird expert in to meet me. Now, I was the Republican on the Migratory Bird Commission. The Migratory Bird Commission oversees all the refuges for birds in North America. There are 2 members of the House, two members of the Senate, and 3 cabinet members. John Dingell was a Democrat in the House. I was a Republican. So I figured this guy wants to talk about birds. So the Interior Department birdman brings in a U.S. citizen from Maine who was the world's expert on falcons. He's a Sikh, so he's got his Sikh hat on, his Sikh gown, but he's an American citizen, very wealthy family. And he brings 2 falcons on his shoulders. These are $1 million birds with the blinders on to my office. I said, boy, they're beautiful birds. How can I help you? Is there something with the birds I should know about? He said, Congressman Weldon, I've spent my whole life protecting falcons, working with the UN on falcon treaties. He said, I worked in all the training camps for all the royal families in the Middle East. I train their children on the sport of falconry because that's their big sport. You know that, right? I said, yeah, I know that. I said, well, what do you want me to do? He said, I want you to help me get into Iran. I said, why do you want to go to Iran? Just because that's where bin Laden is. I said, why would you tell me bin Laden's in Iran?
And why would you want to go there?
My falconers are seeing his birds flying in Iran. And the Iranians will accept me because I've been there many times as a falconer. I'll tag his birds and I'll take the U.S. to exactly where he is. That's 4 silver gold bullets saying the same thing. Over the course of my career, in Congress and out, I have 10 silver bullets that came to me that said that bin Laden was placed in Iran, in Baluchistan, and allowed to roam there. And the quid pro quo was that Al-Qaeda would not attack us on our soil. The deal was not cut with the Iranian government. The falconer that I just mentioned kept going to the Iranian consulate office up at the UN and asking them, why are you harboring bin Laden? This is right after 9/11. And obviously the Iranian consulate office at the UN said, you're crazy, man. We would never do that. He got George Stephanopoulos. You know who that name is? Of course, George used to be the lackey on the House floor for Dick Gephardt. I know him well. I knew him well.
Former Clinton communications director.
He worked on the House floor, running errands for Dick Gephardt when I knew him. So he got Stephanopoulos to ask the question of Ahmadinejad when Ahmadinejad was at the UN. Is it true that you're harboring bin Laden in Iran? Kind of laughingly, Stephanopoulos said. Ahmadinejad said, no way. Ahmadinejad went back to Iran and found out that that's exactly where he was. That's when Iran kicked him over to Pakistan because the government of Iran did not place bin Laden in Iran. the IRG placed him in Iran. The deal was cut with Soleimani. And that's why we killed Soleimani. Even Donald Trump, I don't think, is aware of that at all. Soleimani was the head of the IRG. The point that I mentioned to you earlier is when the Iran was our ally and friend, we were very close. And the Iranian people, I wrote a book about this. My book called Countdown to Terror. That book was published in 2005, the year before they took me out. It's all about Iran. The book was endorsed by the former head of the CIA, Jim Woolsey, and by Al Gore's CIA advisor, Jack. So it's not some wacko story. And I said, the people of Iran are not our enemy. It's the manipulation by the deep state, our deep state and their deep state, that's causing the problem. That was in 2005. The year later, they took me out so I couldn't become chairman. Our deep state was working with their deep state. When the radical mullahs took over Iran, they didn't change their intelligence agency. Those people stayed in power. They were trained by the U.S.
Friends.
They were trained by the U.S.
Friends with the United States. So
Absolutely.
What do you make now of this sort of push to the drumbeats of war to go, that Israel, of course, wants us. They had us take out Saddam Hussein. Israel absolutely loved for us to take out Gaddafi. The third in that triangle, of course, is for us to take out Iran. Do you think the United States will go to war with Iran?
I hope not. My book in 2005 called Countdown to Terror was all about that. And I made the point that we should not be enemies of Iran. In fact, and this is another whole series of topics I can talk to you about. And I had a chance to see the big picture. I was very concerned about Russia's helping Iran with their nuclear program. Their main reactor is called the Bushehr reactor. And as a student of Russia and what they were doing, I was offended that Russia's Minister of Atomic Energy was, in fact, supplying nuclear fuel to Iran. I took two current senators, Lindsey Graham and Roger Wicker, with me to Russia. I have the picture of us together with the Russian nuclear minister. And I pressed him to stop aiding Iran's program. He said, well, we're only doing a little bit. We're not doing a lot of help. I kept pushing the issue. And finally, before he passed away, he just passed away in December, the leading nuclear person in Russia was named Dr. Yevgeny Velikov. He was the head of Kurchatov Institute, their #1 nuclear institute. He came to my office under Bush Jr. And he said, he called me Curt. He said, we know you're upset over the Iran nuclear. I said, absolutely, Yevgeny, you can't do this. This is going to be a problem for you and us down the road. He said, I understand. He said, so I talked to Putin. And Putin has authorized me to offer a bilateral to the U.S., 50-50. The bilateral will oversee any fissile material going to Iran. We turned them down. We.
Shocking. How many times has Putin tried to become friends? Will you allow me to join NATO? Will you allow, let's work together on this? We keep over and over and over again turning him down so that we can go to war with him.
Look, I'm no friend. The CIA tried to make me out to be a friend of. They actually tried to say that I was a lobbyist for Russia. They tried to spin that, but I'm not that. I mean, they're not going to outsmart me. I mean, they're going to have to go a long way. I'm a common firefighter who has youngest of 9 kids. I know the bastards that work for that agency. And I know where they made their money in Russia. I know Hillary Clinton's deal on nuclear material in Russia. I know Bill Clinton's $500,000 from the mayor of Moscow's wife. I know all those hidden things. I know one of our former ambassadors who made millions on a story I'm going to tell you now. Because Putin, when Putin went into office, he reached out to Bush. And Bush made the famous speech. I didn't say this. You can see it. Bush said on national TV, I looked in his eyes, I saw his inner soul, and I realized this was a man I could trust. That's what George W. Bush said. I took that to mean he knows more than I do. Let's rally behind him and see if we can work together. I'm a Ronald Reagan Republican, peace through strength. But in the end, Ronald Reagan said we should work with Russia and the Russian people. So I organized. I went to the State Department. I said, give me a list of all the nonprofits that work on issues with the Russian people and the American people. They said they wouldn't have such a list. So I pulled together 45 of the top experts in Washington that do things like healthcare, energy, environment, they published for me a document 45 pages long with 108 recommendations. Before Bush and Putin met, I said, I want to give this document to them to show them that we in the Congress and in their parliament, the Duma, are ready to work with them to create this new relationship. Now, who signed that document with me? I went to the Senate. I had one day to get signatures before they met. I had a target of 3 senators. They all signed it. Carl Levin, Democrat chairman of Armed Services. Dick Lugar, top Republican on foreign policy. And Joe Biden, chairman of Foreign Affairs. I can show you the letter. Sign with me on the front cover, those 4 signatures. On the inside, 200 members of Congress. Bernie Sanders signed the letter. Mike Pence signed the letter. Dick Armey signed the letter. Jack Murtha signed the letter. On the left and the right, everybody in the Congress said, it's time. We need to work together. The Congress was prepared. The problem was the people that were controlling Bush, they didn't want that. They didn't want that. They didn't want a relationship where Russia and America work together. And then we pushed it into this current debacle we're in, where innocent people are being killed. And look, I've been to Ukraine 25 times. I mean, I love the Ukrainian people. They're great people. And we've destroyed that country. People don't want to talk about that. This is not one man doing that. It's what we did collectively. I mean, who made Ukraine disarm? They had nuclear weapons. Who made them disarm their nuclear weapons after the Soviet Union broke up? We did. America demanded, you give up your nuclear weapons to Ukraine. We made them become vulnerable. And when we brought Yushchenko to Philadelphia, I was up on the stage with him. He was a good friend of mine. His wife was from Chicago. The Orange Revolution, we did not support Yushchenko in helping to prevent additional, look, every country's out to hurt their neighbors or tweak them because some of the land of Ukraine on the border was filled with Russian people. And that was always going to be a contentious area. But it didn't have to lead to war. It wasn't a war under Reagan. Reagan settled that. It became a confrontation when we tried to play games. Ronald Reagan made the statement through his directly to himself and through his foreign policy Secretary of State, James Baker. He said, we will not move NATO up to the border of Russia. That's what he said. And we didn't do that. Now,
so did Bill Clinton. Said the same thing.
Through what it's gone through, but most of these actions we caused ourselves.
We just got some breaking news. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. So a couple of things from Zelensky on the Ukrainian side just posted that none of us wants an endless war, he said. Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table as soon as possible to bring lasting peace closer. Nobody wants peace more than Ukrainians. My team and I stand by ready to work. So he says this. That also came just as we learned from the Ukrainian parliament that they were basically ready to come to the table separate from Zelensky, kind of going around his back on this. And then President Trump, just a few moments ago, in response to Trump's decision to pause military aid to Ukraine, European Union has unveiled the Rearm Europe Initiative, an $800 billion defense investment plan designed to strengthen Europe's military capabilities and reduce reliance on U.S. security assistance. So it seems like Europe is hell-bent on going to war with Russia because the United States is stepping back.
Well, Europe they've consistently failed to meet their NATO requirements, which is what Trump went after them for in his first term and said, look, if you're going to be a part of NATO, we're not going to carry the load ourselves. You pay your fair share. So I'll believe that when I see it. Some of the NATO countries did step up, but most of them have not. Europe has always relied on the U.S. And I want us to maintain a strong NATO. I can tell you, I formed the RADA Congress relationship in Congress. I was the co-chairman with Marcy Kaptur, who's still in the Congress. She's the oldest woman in the Congress. She was my co-chair. We took delegations to meet with the Ukraine RADA 25 times, and we hosted them in Washington. I did the same thing with the Russian Duma 25, 30 times. We all got along. There was no battle. There was no contention. There was no undermining. NATO was not an issue. We all knew that Ukraine was not going to become a part of NATO, but we also knew that Russia had to respect Ukraine's rights. All of this was contrived. I can show you photographs of us all meeting in Washington together, the RADA, the Parliament, the Congress, and the Duma all together. This is all contrived. And we've got to stop this nonsense from occurring because none of these people doing this are elected. They're not elected by the people. You don't even know who they are. And I'm not going to let this sit because they end up killing. When I realized that bin Laden was allowed to roam in Iran. And by the way, I can bring you Ahmadinejad right now because I had people talking to him, and he will confirm what I just told you. And I never met him before, but he will confirm this now. When I realized that we sent all those kids to Afghanistan, knowing a few people knowing he wasn't there, and 2,500 American heroes came home in body bags, and thousands more with their arms and legs blown off or no sight, it makes me sick to my stomach. That cannot be
put it
tolerated.
like that.
And you can't
when you put it like that,
acceptable casualties.
We knew that he wasn't there. The whole purpose that Donald Rumsfeld put before the American people were going after bin Laden in Afghanistan, but they knew that he wasn't there. And further, not only did they know that he wasn't there, they facilitated his hospital treatment and the removal of bin Laden into Iran.
And I had two royal families in the Middle East who I work with very closely confirm that to me. Of those 10 silver bullets, 2 of them were royal family members from 2 different royal families. And the bin Laden task force director from the CIA, who saw information that he had never been given when he was doing that job, Michael Scheuer, called my office. Called my home. They wanted to do a film about me after I left. I said, I'm not getting involved anymore after what they did to my family. I'm not getting involved because there's nobody there to support me on the government side. I'm not going to get support out of Bush Jr. He's not in control. And Obama's certainly not going to support me because the people, Obama wasn't in control of the government. We're not stupid. And neither was Biden. And I like Biden. I'm friends with Biden. Up until he had his problems, I did a lot of things with him and know him very well. He traveled me. He went to Libya with me. He went to Iraq with me. I have pictures of him and I together. He came to my son's funeral and stood in line for an hour. But people have got to wake up. They've got to stop thinking about this rhetoric spewed out as part of an intelligence machine. They're the ones spinning the conspiracy. It's not people like you giving the truth. It's our government agency who's made it a master's, a doctorate degree, but they're the ones doing all the conspiracy work and making you think you're crazy, or not you, but other people think they're crazy. They're not crazy. All we want is the truth. And that's what I want.
Can I ask you why? Can I ask you, I'll get you out of here in a minute, Congressman. You've been so gracious with your time. Once we had Rob O'Neill and the team that went into Pakistan, and President Obama comes out on national television and says, "We got him. We got Obama. We got Osama bin Laden." What were you thinking at that moment? Why then? Why was it used then? They could have gotten him right after 9/11. They could have gotten him before 9/11. So why at that moment did that happen?
You pointed out we could have gotten him in the base camps in the Middle East, which was in the Clinton administration, and that's been publicly acknowledged. I assume that somebody decided we had to have closure, and Obama needed some big win in the foreign policy arena. So Obama, this is going to be your big foreign policy win. I don't know why else they did that. And unless I have firsthand information that I can verify, I tend to be skeptical about anything I hear. That's why in the end, as the vice chairman of the Defense Committee, at the same time I was vice chairman of Homeland Security, both committees, members from both parties totally respected me. All the Democrats. All of them supported me. All my trips with Kodos were all bipartisan. I could not trust the briefings I was getting from my own intelligence agency. I would get more information from reporters who had stories leaked to them, and they would come to me and say, "Mr. Chairman, we have anonymous sources telling us this." Those anonymous sources were always from the agency. They played the game. Then they blame everyone else for doing what they do. Until America wakes up to that, it's not going to stop. And
what do you want President Trump to do? What do you want President Trump to do, Congressman?
First of all, I did a TV show in May. I said his first priority has got his own personal safety. I predict they're going to try to take him out. That was a month before the shooting in Pennsylvania. And then we saw a second attack. He still has, look, there's this cadre of people that he now has taken on. When he took away the security clearances, 51 people, we don't see this publicly, but I'll tell you, that's a sweltering, bubbling menace, because they have contacts all over the world. That concerns me. And Trump's safety
concerns you. Trump's safety concerns you, meaning that these 51 swamp rats, these scumbags, have contacts all over the world that they could reach out to and say, we need you to do something to President Trump.
Absolutely. They have relationships that they've established for decades. And I'm sure they're saying Trump's not going to last long. He won't be in maybe one term at the most, or something will happen to him. That's my first concern. The second concern is the people around Trump, who are all good people. I don't have any problems with any of them. They don't know what they don't know. When I say they don't know what they don't know, I was there for 30 years. I have 20 years in Congress, and I've been out for a little over 10 years. And I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I have common sense, and I push the envelope repeatedly. And I wasn't some radical. Let me say this to you. I support a strong intelligence service for our country. I think that's important. When I first went to Congress, I became very good friends with Jim Woolsey. Jim Woolsey endorsed this book. Now, he had left the agency. On his own, he publicly wrote a 3-page letter endorsing my book. And if you see the title of my book, it takes on the CIA. The other person who endorsed my book was Jack Caravelli. He was Gore's CIA advisor and a good guy. He endorsed this book. When George Tenet went into office, George Tenet had his staff call my office and said, the director wants to host Congressman Weldon for breakfast. That never happens in Congress, where the director of the agency would call you down. So I go down to CIA headquarters, my first time there. I took my staffer there who had worked for the CIA for 10 years. He said, Congressman, I can't believe that the director's calling you for breakfast. I went to Tenet's office on the top floor. He had a long table there. All of his direct reports were sitting around the table. He sat me up front with him. And he said, Congressman, this agency respects your work respects the work you've been doing against the Soviet Union and Russia. We appreciate it. And I want you to know, this group of people will give you whatever you want to help you. And if you don't get what you want, you come to me. Now, that was the director of the CIA. Porter Goss was a former member of the House who became head of the CIA. Porter was a friend of mine. Leon Panetta was a member of the House who became head of the CIA. When Leon was head of the Oceans Commission for Clinton, they gave me their #1 award for my international work on oceans. That's 4 CIA directors. And George Bush, I can send you the clip, 3 months after they ruined my career, and they raided my daughter's house and never talked to her, ever. No one ever talked to her. George Bush came to our national dinner in Washington in front of 2,000 leaders, 2,000 members of Congress. George Bush, the father, who I fully respect, and he gave a tribute to me. I'll match that tribute to any other member of Congress. He said, Congressman Weldon, you're the kind of person that America needs as a leader.
It's the goal of every political leader who is blessed with the opportunity to serve the public to leave behind a legacy that in some way makes our nation stronger, better, and safer. Curt, you've done just that through your dedication and your commitment to our nation's 1 million first responders. So on behalf of Barbara and myself, thank you for your 20 years of incredible service to this great nation, and best wishes as you begin a new chapter in your life. Thank you, and may God bless America.
That was George H.W. Bush. I'll send you the video. They try to take the video down. It's all over the internet now. I'll send you that video. I'm not anti having intelligence. I'm anti scumbags in intelligence who use it for their own personal gain. And they don't care. They don't care who gets killed. They don't care who dies. There are no acceptable casualties. There are no soldiers who are acceptable losses. There are no firefighters who we can accept being killed. That's not America. And that's not why I had 8 brothers and sisters all served in the military. I wanted to go in the Air Force Academy. I got the nomination, but I had bad eyes. I couldn't get a waiver. So I devoted my life to firefighters. That's what America's all about. It's not about scumbags hiding behind the door, making money, and planning games to kill other people. And that's, unfortunately, in some cases, what's happened here. It's got to stop.
Congressman Curt Weldon, I really appreciate you joining us. I hope this message gets to the president. I hope that we have another investigative 9/11 committee that actually is not a whitewashing, a presidential task force that looks at all of this and gets to the bottom of it. And I think under President Trump, hopefully we can get there.
If you keep speaking out, that's what'll do it. People got to watch your show. Likewise. They got to spread your word. It's the name of the game. I can't do it. You can do it. Thank you.
Thank you.